Welcome to the Condover channel. I'll be making another Nomad Sculpt tutorial today. This time I'll create scale armor for both Elden Ring Wylder and Elden Ring Messmer. I'll be following the original From Software armor designs, but I'll go through my step-by-step process so that you can apply this workflow to your own characters. Let's go. First things first, it's always useful to get some basic understanding of our subject matter. I'm not the type to gather lots of reference. I just go on websites like Wikipedia, scroll through the page, there's some cute illustrations. Sometimes you'll find good illustrations on how the pieces come together. Cool. Now we know enough, don't need to go down the rabbit hole. With the knowledge acquired, we'll start by creating one individual scale for each design. This will be repeated later to form a chain, which we will then repeat again to form a mesh around the body parts. Let's start with sculpting the individual scales. I'll go ahead and add a spear and add a box, and you can choose which one you prefer. The scale armor is pretty small on his arm, so I'm going to size these down. So I think this is pretty alright. There are two ways to adjust a primitive shape. One would be to adjust from these center circles here so that we can adjust symmetrically. The other way, which I prefer, would be to use the gizmo tool. I'll go ahead and make a thin mesh. At this stage, I'll turn on the wireframe. So by default, there's a wireframe button down here. I have it keyed to my Macropad. Based on my own preference, I like to have one face for the edges and edges coming through the center of the object. I will go ahead and validate this. If we do like this, where we have an odd number of faces, then it's hard to create a sharp point in the middle later on. Anytime I use a symmetry plane, that is half of the job done. And with all the scale armor, it's a diamond shape. It's symmetrical on the top side and the bottom side. So I'll go ahead and activate this. So instead of moving things bit by bit, like this, it's going to be pretty slow. I'll go ahead and move these points to where they should be, somewhere around here so that it forms a straight line. And then now I smooth this up. Then move this around, smooth it up. Near the axis of the symmetry plane, I try to tap lighter so that it doesn't move too much. Sometimes the edges can become quite thin. Then I'll use the inflate brush and just slightly bring it back. Now that the objects are validated, we can use the drag tool to adjust the shapes. Now to the fun part, where we'll be using repeaters to make tons of this. There are a bunch of stuff in my outliner, ignore them. Just focus on this one and this one. So with the scale armor selected, I'll go ahead and add a curve repeater. And something that I like to do when I add new things into the scene, I like to have the gizmo tool selected and have on gizmo selected. The curve repeater will be created at the same pivot point as this armor piece. So now that we have a curve repeater created, you'll see the curve repeater icon here and 2 points of a spline. If I select this, I can move this around, and if I select this, the same thing applies. And when I bring them out and click on anywhere along this line, I can create a new point. And be mindful that because this is a 3D scene, the side view also matters. Now when the object is parented to the curve, I can increase the count, like so, to instantly create multiple pieces like that. So the start of the curve repeater will have this red icon. Typically, I like to set this as the anchor point of my curve repeaters. So before we start moving this around, it'll be a good idea to see how you want to set the repeaters up. When I'm sculpting, I always like to break things down into simple basic shapes. This way I can plan ahead on the things that I need to build. So let's say for his scale armor pieces, if I break it down to a very simple shape, it'll be a cylinder like this that opens up to a bigger diameter. Then based on the design, it breaks up this way. There's a gap over here. And then the scale armor on his shirt is quite hidden, so I can very easily duplicate this one and bring it up here. These 4 pieces look the same, so I can use the mirror repeater to mirror the left and the right side. So hidden chest area, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the anchor points will be here. Same for this one, the anchor points will be somewhere around here, and I'll extend it out like this. When I look at the top view of a cylinder, I can use a mirror repeater to mirror this axis and mirror this other axis. Moving on to Messmer's piece is a little bit more complicated, but we can try to break it down a little bit more. So for the skirt, it's pretty straightforward. I'll put the anchor points here and then bring them down this way. For his torso, it's a little bit more complicated, where there are different lengths and there's even one piece that goes around like that. So I may want to put the curve repeater icons down here instead of up here, where it will be at different heights, and then bring them up to different heights like this. As for the side chains, I will just start from one end and loop it out to the other end. I probably can't mirror the front and the back side, but maybe I might be able to mirror side to side. I'm not really sure yet, but I'll keep that in mind when I'm working on this armor piece. With the curve repeater, there's a little bit of a learning curve. Sometimes it can be a bit confusing how the mesh moves as you're moving the curve repeater. So since I've made the decision to put the icon up here, I will move this up and move this down. You can see because the scale armor has been connected to the curve repeater, the rotation of the scale is affected too. And you can simply fix this by rotating it the other way around. So with curve repeaters, the rotation of the object matters. If you want to do things neater, you can change to orthographic view and have the magnet activated. This way, when I move the points of the spline around, I can snap it to the axis so that I can form a straight line. Now I'll flip this around again and do a rotation with angle snapping to 90 degrees. This will snap the rotation to every 90 degrees, and this way you'll know for sure that the scale pieces are aligned to the grid. I'll do the same thing for Wylder scale armor. Now that we've set the curve up, we can increase the count, like so. But before we rotate it, I'll want to adjust the pivot point. So under this button pivot here, which I've also bind to my hotkey, this will enter edit pivot mode, and I can move it up so that I can pivot like so. Now we can go ahead and rotate along the x-axis until they're not intersecting anymore. So the next thing that we can do is to instance this. I'll demonstrate the difference between clone and instance. So this has been cloned and this is instance. Items that has been instanced will share the same colored bars on the left. So the curve repeaters have the same color, the box objects have the same color. With cloning, if I adjust this, it doesn't affect this one. But if I adjust this one, you can see that it affects the instance object. It might not be a good idea to have curve repeaters instance, because let's say if I want one curve repeater to swing outwards, I wouldn't want the other one to do the same. So whenever I instance, I will select the curve repeater and uninstance them, and that way the objects are still instanced. But then each curve repeater can do its own thing. Now when we look at the scale armor pieces, you'll see that it staggers. We can create this way. But when we do this, you'll see that the starting points of every curve repeater starts to stagger. And I prefer to keep all the icons on the same level. So I'll instance the object, bring it down to like a halfway point, bring it to the right. I'll go ahead and delete this. And now I have the staggered effect. Messmer scale armor is quite similar. I'll do the same thing where I will instance this, move this around the halfway point, and then delete this one and instance this one, while uninstancing the curves. Before I go any further, it's always nice to add some color to the scale pieces, because things will look closer to the reference image. And this way it's a lot easier for me to see whether or not I'm going on the right track. To see the roughness and metalness of an object, you'll need to be in lit PBR mode instead of the madcap mode. So you can see in madcap mode, it's just showing me the color values of the scale armor pieces. Because I have enough RAM for this, I'll just sculpt in lit PBR mode. Because we rotated the scale armor a little bit, the pivot point is slightly rotated. So when I moved it down, it goes out like so. I'll select these three at the same time, and then I'll move this back to align it with the rest. I'll do the same thing to this one, move it back and align it to the others. Now the layers should be on the correct planes. You can see how much easier it is to check the final look when we have a bunch of them together compared to when we only had a single one like this. So I'll go ahead and do some minor adjustments. Now that I can see the arrangement a bit better, I'll eyeball this like so. For making big changes, I'll prefer to work on like the lower subdivision levels and try to form a sharper edge. You'll notice that if I only rotate one of this, the others wouldn't be rotated. So because I'm just doing a very minor shift, I'll use the drag tool to pull this out a little bit. I'll go up each division level and check whether or not there's something that I need to fix. Now when I go back to the higher subdivision level, you can see that the detailed painting that I did has blurred out. I'll just go ahead and sharpen the details again. Now it's looking pretty good. Right now for Messmer scale armor, I think that there are too many repeated right here. So to access the curve repeater settings again, in the outliner, select the curve repeater. Let's change this to 6. So 6 looks a lot closer than 7. It seems like the second layer are too low. So I'm going to select the 3 of them, bring that up to the halfway mark. But I feel like we can probably go even less. So I think this is a lot closer to what this looks like. I'm going to isolate one of them first. The edges should be sharp. So I'll go back down. Let's try and match it as well as we can. Let's go up one subdivision level and just lightly tap with the smooth brush to make it smooth. At this point, I'm still not really sure what the exact shape should be, just because the reference is not really that great. But the good thing about having instances is that future changes will still be applied to everything else. So I don't really need to worry about making everything perfect right now. So the same thing here, I feel like they're overlapping too much. So instead of using the gizmo tool like this, I'm just going to use the drag tool to push in the top part and pull out the bottom part. So push in and pull out the bottom slightly, and that should help rotate the scale armor a little bit. Now it looks pretty alright. The only thing missing is the crease in the middle of each piece, so I'll use the brush tool for this. In the lower subdivision level, I'll use a small brush and draw in the center like so. And in the higher subdivision level, I can even sculpt inwards like this and then smooth out the pieces. So now it creates a sharp point in the middle. It still looks a little bit blunt from this angle, so I'll use the crease tool to create a sharp point and then smooth it out like this. So try sculpting in the different subdivision levels and see what works and what doesn't. Sometimes it's easier to do certain things in the lower subdivision levels, and sometimes it's a lot easier in the higher ones. I think that intuition will come naturally as you practice sculpting your own things. Now that we have both scale armor done, it's time to put it into practical use. So with this shape, I can get away with having all the pieces on one single repeater. So with the repeater in the middle, I can also lock into front view so that I can't rotate out of this view. This being the middle piece, I'll bring this one up higher. Instance this, and instance this again. I'll look at the side view now to see what's happening at the side. So you can see that these two are too far back. So I'll move them forward. So back to the front view, I can see that they're not really as aligned. It might be that the sculpt is still not correct. So maybe I may need to make them thinner like this and then adjust them some more. Check that they are quite lined up at the side view, and we have one piece of his skirt scale armor. So with the curve repeater selected, I can bring them in here and bring them up and maybe rotate them so that they line up with his skirt. Bring this up even higher and then bring it back in so that it doesn't intersect with the skirt. Now that it's up here, it's clear that it's too short. To make this longer, it's very simple. We just go to the front view, lock it, activate the grid if you haven't yet, make sure that snapping is enabled, and then bring it down. But it seems like it's not snapping on the grid line. So I think you will need to disable the snapping on the curve repeater like this, and now it should work. So I'm going to the right side now to bring it out a little bit. This should look about right. Now to fill up the gaps over here, just increase the count size. Push this back a little bit more, and that should be good for this piece. Now that that's done, we can make use of this for the rest. So I'll select everything, instance this, and then uninstance the curve repeaters. So using the gizmo tool, I will bring this down. You can see how useful it is to have the curve repeater icon over here so that I can see where I want to place it. I think it's a bit too short right now. I'll go back to the spline mode and bring this down. I'll increase this by 1 just to fill up the gap. I will also align this back to the center. To make the other two pieces, I'll make use of the mirror repeater. I want to create the mirror repeater from this point. So with the gizmo tool selected, I'll add, have all gizmo selected, and create a mirror. Now the mirror will be created at the pivot point of the scale armor. Something useful that you can use mirror repeaters for is to check whether or not your sculpt is symmetrical. So we can see with the mirror repeater on, there's some slight difference between the left and the right side. So I can move one of them to make them more symmetrical. So I'll instance this, uninstance the curve repeater again, and bring one of them out of the mirror group because this doesn't need to be mirrored. Then with this one selected, I can use the gizmo tool, rotate it out a little bit and move it to the right side. Always be mindful that this is a 3D scene, so you should check all the sides when you can. I think that looks pretty good. Now I'll instance this one, uninstance the curve, and bring this up here. You can make it shorter since it's mostly covered over here, or I can just hide it inside his chest. And then from the side view, because his chest is a bit curved, I can add more points like this. And then from the front view, Make sure that they are centered in the scene. And that is the chest scale armor done too. We'll work on the more complicated arm now. So I can grab one of this again and I'll move this to the right side. So I want to create a mirror repeater in the middle of his mesh. And knowing that his torso is symmetrical, I can go ahead, select this, and then add on gizmo, mirror, and take out the mirror repeater. I'll prefer to put it around his shoulder height. So I'll bring it up a bit. Now that I have that, let's start setting up this piece. I can delete this one too, delete this one. So I have this now. So I'll bring this up a bit, reduce the count. And going back to the drawing that I did just now, I know that the basic shape for this is a cylinder. I can create a cylinder at the vault origin and move it up there. But because I know that the pivot point for his shirt sleeve is pretty good, I can create the cylinder from this point. So on Gizmo, create the cylinder. It's super huge right now. I'm going to take this out and then scale it down. Like this. We know that the top side has a smaller diameter. So I'll click on radius to bring up this handle here. Now I can adjust different sizes for the top and bottom edge. I'll use this to roughly create the flat out shape. So look at the side. I think it looks pretty good. Now we can use this as a guide for our scale armor pieces. I'll hide his shirt sleeve for a bit so that I can snap this onto the cylinder. So with the snap enabled, I can bring this over here and snap this to the bottom edge like this. Now they are perfectly aligned to the cylinder. You can see that it's going to be a lot easier than trying to shape this freehand like that. I made the mistake of doing this in the beginning and I had to redo everything because the shape was really weird. So I can probably break this down one step further by mirroring the left side and the right side. So to create the mirror repeater that matches the shape of the cylinder, add a mirror repeater with the cylinder selected like this. And then I'll bring this out and parent this curve onto that mirror repeater. If the pivot point doesn't look right, I can edit the pivot point with this again. So I'll go ahead and rotate it one axis at a time. Then click it again to disable it. And now I can rotate this. Maybe I'll move this up this way. I think now it's pretty good. I feel like maybe this is too long. So I'll just shorten this a bit and then reduce the count. So I should rotate this to follow the curve and rotate this a bit. I think at this point I realized that it is possible to mirror the other side as I thought earlier in my drawing. So I'll see if I can use this. So not the y-axis. Yes, the z-axis works. But something we can do better than repeating two pieces of scale armor across. Since we know that this cylinder is pretty uniform, we can create 4 pieces of scale for one repeater. This way I can move more pieces across. And to cover the centerpiece, I'll only need 2 of them, and I'll just hide the extra object in itself like this. This way I can keep the jagged formation of the scale armor. With that done, I can hide the cylinder now, add the curve repeater to the mirror across this body, and that is all the scale armor done. Nice. To make it even nicer, you can create a group for all the individual pieces. This way it will be more organized. Now if you want to rotate the scale armor together with his arm for posing, we can select the mirror repeater and validate this. Remember to keep instances. Make sure that the curve repeaters are not instants. And now we should have 2 groups. One for the left, one for the right. We are going to bring this up to his arm. Now when I rotate his arm, his scale armor follows with it. For Messmer scale armor, it's not that much different. The only difference is that there's a lot more manual work because I need to adjust this by hand. So first thing is to create this band around his torso to create a guideline, and then a series of repeaters around his torso. It's quite a slow process because I have to do it one by one. In the end, I didn't use a mirror repeater here because his torso is slightly different in his original pose. But using this method, by following his torso shape, I can adjust the lengths of each strand, and the end result is pretty nice. So I ended here. To recap, start off with a sphere or a cube, whichever you prefer, and try to sculpt the scale armor as close as possible to your reference. It doesn't have to be perfect at the start. Then extend the pattern using curve repeaters, create a staggered look. Once you've created a mesh, you can go for a second round of adjustments to match it closer to your reference. And after that, break down your character design to more basic, simple shapes. That way you can plan ahead on how you want to construct your scale armor pieces. Create simple shapes as a guide so that you can snap your curve repeaters on them. Or just slowly move the pieces bit by bit until it matches the pose that you have for your character.